pick your chair. Maybe you should sit next to each other. Yeah.
Oh, you got one over there.
I'll be over there on the side.
We'll just decide about the chair thing. You guys have already done that.
Yep, we're in great shape. So I figured that many of you are here and know Billy's credentials, but for those of you who don't know Hank, let me start by introducing Hank. Hank is an on-air investigative reporter in Boston. She is the winner of 36 Emmy Awards, the Edward R. Murrow Award. She has won 5 Agatha Awards for crime fiction and various other glorious things. So she's a real celebrity, and we're always thrilled when we get her here. Billy, I don't actually know. We share. He's never been here before, and I missed him when you dropped in earlier, but we share a publisher. Billy's book is being published by Source Books out of Naperville, Illinois.
I'm just basically your true crime goth dad.
True crime golf.
True crime goth dad, yeah.
Oh, goth dad.
Yeah.
This is Phoenix. I thought it was a golf.
Pretty much the exact opposite. Do a 180 from that into the exit.
So interestingly enough, we started a publishing company in 1997, and Source Books bought Poison Pen Press in January. So we are now actually co-published, which is very cool. And with that, I'm going to ask Hank if she would like to talk a little bit about The Murder List, which is her new book, and then talk to Billy.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Is this on? Lovely to see you all. This is phenomenal that you're here today. I just arrived in Boston, from Boston. Are you fixing something? Talk more.
It's not on.
It is? We'll just I've been in television for 43 years. You'd think I'd get microphones right about, oh, what is this thing? I don't know.
You want mine instead? It's louder.
Sure.
Take mine. Nobody cares what I say at this point.
That's true. Okay, I'll start over. Hi. I'm so glad to be here today. It's awesome to see you all, to be here with Billy. We do the same kind of thing in a different way, so it's quite incredible to have this time to chat about that and figure out methods and how we do things and how you all can help and how you all can be involved and why you all care about true crime and about fictional crime and about reporting and about journalism. And I think that's what sort of making things right and making the system work is what brings us together in what we do, which is similar. The Murder List is my 11th thriller. It just got a star from review from Library Journal calling it a must-read, so I'm thrilled with the wonderful response about it. The Murder List is a standalone, and it came from my sort of understanding of justice, of the justice system, and what is good? What does good mean? My husband is a criminal defense attorney, and one day at the breakfast table, he was telling me about his latest murder case, where he was defending a really in a notorious murder case. And I was thinking, with one track of my mind, I was thinking about what an interesting story he was telling me about this case. Somebody's agent is calling them, I think.
Right. Please turn off your phones, anybody who's failed to do that.
And unless it's Hollywood, and then just go ahead and answer the phone. Anyway, I was thinking about this really gruesome murder case that Jonathan was defending, and I was thinking, one track of my mind was thinking, though, what a good guy he is. What a good guy he is to be standing up for the little guy, to be protecting the rights of somebody who's innocent until proven guilty, how that's who we'd want in our corner if we were unfairly accused of a crime. What a good guy he is. And then I started thinking about the prosecutor's wife across town, listening to her husband talk about the same case, a case in which he, of course, wants the guy to be convicted. He thinks this guy, with every fiber of his soul, is guilty. And I wondered, did she think, what a good guy my husband is, right? Standing up, protecting the public, putting miscreants in prison, making sure that we are all safe. He thinks he's a good guy too. And I thought, how can both sides be the good guy? How can that be? And what does that mean? People choose, any of you lawyers here today? Okay, so you choose the side. Are you a prosecutor or are you a defense attorney? That's a sole decision. Are you a lawyer too?
Well, I did all the work.
She said she did all the work.
Legal assistant. Legal assistant.
Oh, that's
for
good. Well, you know, that is good for you.
the defense.
So anyway, for the defense, okay, so you see how that works. And so I wanted to set up a book where a young lawyer was deciding whether to be a prosecutor or a defense attorney. So really quickly, Rachel North, a young law student, is married to Jack Kirkland, a brilliant and obsessed defense attorney, and she's working for Martha Gardner, the manipulative and powerful prosecutor. What could go wrong, right? So it's a high stakes game of cat and mouse and cat, but there can only be one mouse. So one wonderful reviewer said, if John Grisham and Lisa Scottolini had a book baby, the murder list would be this. So I think that pretty much explains it. So Billy, talk a little bit about your book, where that came from. And like mine was to talk about how you choose who's a good guy. What is the goal of yours?
Goal of my book is, I wrote about unsolved murders for 17 years. And when you do that, you're writing stories with no endings. And it can, no matter how good of a narrator you are, no matter how good of a narrative that you craft, no matter how crafty of a phrase you can turn, you still have a story with no ending. And I just got really pissed off at some point and had an aha moment, and I was watching a video because I couldn't sleep at night. It was about 2 a.m. and when I can't sleep at 2 a.m., what do? I Google unsolved murders like you guys do. And I see this guy getting attacked in a street in Chicago. And, to preface this, a friend of mine who had been writing a book about the Golden State Killer had just passed away. Her name is Michelle McNamara. She wrote a book called I'll Be Gone in the Dark. I started, right when that happened and right when I found out, I used to say the reason why I only write about unsolved crimes is because I hate the guy that got away with it. And I hated him because of what he took away from the person who he killed and the family. But with Michelle's passing, the first thing I thought was, this guy won. Or did this guy win? And I don't just hate them now because of the victims' families and the victim themselves, and hate for the investigators that are spending their entire lives. I knew how much Michelle spent working on this case, and there was this guy just sitting there with this answer that he was holding close to his chest. And there literally are 200,000 of those people out there right now. So I'm watching this video of this guy getting attacked in the street in Chicago, and the video's very clear. And it's 4 months later after it happened, and it was actually national news. And I kept thinking to myself, why don't we know who this guy is? So this guy attacks a guy runs away. Unfortunately, he looks back, and this guy's a big guy. He clocks him. He falls into the crosswalk, the victim. The victim was a bartender named Marcus Gaines. He's out cold before he even hits the crosswalk. Then the guy who punched him people gathered around. The guy who punched him yelled at everybody that you're next. So everybody scattered. So you just have a guy in a crosswalk in the road, and you have nobody around him. And unfortunately, about 30 seconds later, a taxi cab ran over him and killed him. And I just kept thinking, why can't we find out who he is? And then something just clicked in my head and said, I know the reason why, because nobody watches television anymore. Nobody watches, nobody reads newspapers anymore, especially people that would potentially know who this guy is, somebody in his 20s. But where are they? They're on social media. So I just went out and put an ad, not an ad actually, started a Facebook page, and I wrote it in his voice. I'm the River North Puncher. It was in River North, Chicago. This is me, do you know my name? And I had the video of it, and I also went on Twitter and Instagram. Now on Twitter, I was buying geo-targeted ads, and that's one of the keys for it, because I was trying to hit anybody within that mile radius. Now, a mile radius of this area is a big area. But I also was begging for retweets. And I got a retweet from somebody named Barstool Big Cat from Barstool Sports. Somebody wrote to us, being him, and saying, I hope this helps. And it was a front-facing picture of the puncher. And I thought he made it because, we're looking at grainy video from above. This is a front-facing picture of this guy. And I'm looking at it going, did you make this? Like, did you 3D model it or something like that? And he's not answering me back. I'm like, please, I'll follow you, you follow me back, DM, all that kind of stuff. He's not answering me. A day goes by after me pleading. He says, actually, it was a friend of mine who was there, and he took a video. And he includes the video. And I open the video, and the first thing I see is Marcus Gaines in the crosswalk. And then the camera pans up, and then the puncher is walking straight at me. And I said, this guy took a video. This guy was there. This guy was right there, right when it happened. So now I had a front-facing photo of him. I could tell that he didn't have an accent. He probably was from the area. And I was like, you know what? Cook County has all their mugshots online. I just went through every mugshot, got him, the guy that looked like it. Still wanted to be sure though, so I went to Chicago and walked around. This guy's name was Marcus Moore. Walked around that area. I went to the first guy who was a valet. Do you recognize this guy? No. Second guy's a bouncer? No. And then this gentleman who was probably homeless walked up to me. I said, "Okay, can I ask you a question? Do you see this guy's picture? Do you know what this guy's name is?" He said, "Yeah, that's Big Dummy, real name Marcus." So I got him. So then it was a matter of now convincing the police in order to arrest him. And that was actually harder to do than actually finding him.
Yeah, the police don't really like when people just walk in and say, I have the guy that you couldn't catch.
Yeah.
That's not their favorite thing.
But one of the things that I had to do was, I found this guy, and I find his Facebook page. And he's saying he's in Holbrook, New York. But meanwhile, I know he's in Minnesota because his brother's in Minnesota. And he just got in a relationship with a woman in Minnesota. So he's not in Holbrook, New York. Also, he had taken a selfie of himself, and behind him was a truck. And there was a logo on the truck, and I did a search for the logo of trucks in Minnesota, and sure enough, it was a logo of a Minneapolis work truck. So I'm sending the address to the police saying, he's here, he's at this house. Finally, I had to go through LinkedIn, find an old chief of detectives, old head of detectives from Chicago PD, and said, please, just try to get the ball rolling on this. And then it literally was about 5.5 months after that they were able to pick them up, and when the marshals got involved. So that's what started this
What did you
thing
think
there.
when they got it?
I did a fist pump. Who told me was his cousin, called me, and she just said she was just so happy, because I had to deliver her that information, and I had to show her the video, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't just send it to her. I had to see her in person. So I met her in person because it's the last picture of her loved one, laying in the ground right before he dies. So we've had a strong relationship, and then when she called up, she just said, they got him, and it was just such an amazing feeling.
I mean, it is interesting because there is this search, there is the research and the tracking down clues and following leads and using your own expertise. I've been a television reporter for 43 years, and I've wired myself with hidden cameras and gone undercover and in disguise and chased down criminals and confronted corrupt politicians. And every day there's a moment when I've been threatened and stalked and had people come to my house and all these kinds of things. I had a news director once who said a good investigative reporter comes to town and works until everybody hates them. And because what you're doing is something that you're poking people. You're ruining people's lives, and it's a thing where you have to balance, and I've learned to do this too after all these years. You sort of have to balance that what you are doing, and we were talking about this earlier, what you're doing is good. You're making the world work the way it's supposed to work, but there are people who are not going to like that. And I have people, the simplest thing that happens is that people call me and scream at me and say, how could you do that to me? if I find the person who's been stealing people's homes or stealing people's money or threatening their children, and I say, I didn't do anything to you, right? You did it. I just caught you. And all that goes into my books. People ask me if I do a lot of research for my novels, and I say I've been doing research for 43 years. I just didn't realize that's what I was doing. So you learn as you go, and you get sort of empowered as you go, and you also realize how much you don't know, and you realize that human drama that's really around every corner. People know things.
Yeah, I mean, with me, it's more about, the drama that I see is usually from the victim's family. So now victim's family will come to me and say, this happened 6 months ago, nobody's helping, please help. And it's the relationship that I get with that family. And I learn, especially if I'm doing like a missing persons case or something, when I learn all of the drama because they're laying it out there. This person was had just, was living with a man for 20 years. This is an actual case that I did out of Illinois. She met a friend on Facebook and then decided to move in with that friend. And so there was this love triangle going on and trying to figure out what was going on. And it turns out, and I'm down there, I'm trying to track down any kind of security camera or anything to find out. And it happened on Halloween too. Any kind of thing about where this woman is, and then we finally located her, and she had just driven off of into a ditch and died, and you couldn't really see. It was just so heavily, the foliage was just so heavy that nobody had seen it. They saw it with a helicopter, and I was, 3 days before that, I didn't know anything about this drama that's going on. A lot of the times on the cases that I'm doing, the drama is the last thing I get. Because I'm just trying to identify this person. I know that he killed somebody. I know that, there's one case that I worked on in El Monte, California, where all I had was a guy in a Halloween mask. Guy jumps over a fast food counter, a Jack in the Box, points a gun, and I think the gun probably just went off, or maybe somebody tried to do something, shoots a guy dead. And then he jumps back over and leaves, and they couldn't find the guy. So all I had was a guy with a Halloween mask. So it's like, well, what could you do from there? I learned about the guy that he had shot, and he was not even supposed to be working that day. He had just gotten his pharmacy license. He was just like gonna not be at Jack in the Box anymore. He was gonna move on. He had just gotten engaged, so I knew that drama, in a sense, which really is just life. And then, but how was I going to catch this guy? And there's, one thing that I always say with these investigations that I do is that you don't just have to have somebody's face. You can identify somebody from the way that they walk. You can identify somebody from, when this guy jumps over the counter, he jumps over the counter like a young man. He's going to be under 30. And just the way that the sneakers that he's wearing, the choice of wearing a Halloween mask to begin with is very sort of dead presidents. It's not something that a crow would do. It's very hard to see out of a mask like that anyway. So, narrowing it down and knowing where to target with those specific geo-targeted campaigns, and then we were able to get this guy. And, I tell that story in the book primarily because to show that you gotta keep on sharing these videos and sharing these things, because you don't just have to have a face. You can really have anything.
It's so funny to hear you say it from that point of view, because I've gone undercover so many times in my career, and people sometimes say to me, how do you go undercover? Don't people know who you are? And it's really interesting how so much of going undercover is not about your face, but about your entire demeanor. If I act differently, or speak a little bit differently, or carry myself differently, or look timid, or look unself-confident, that can really matter. That, when you're undercover, you are being the other person with like 99% of yourself, and then there's that one little moment that you're still you, with your, you're still motivated by what you're doing. I was undercover in a cult church on Cape Cod several years ago, looking all dowdy, and if you don't want to see me with no makeup on, that's part of the undercover. in a cult church back in the day where hidden cameras were not as good as they are now. Now we could all be wearing
I'm
hidden
taping you
cameras.
right
Yeah,
now.
me too. When the key about hidden cameras, if you see somebody go like this, then you know you're in trouble. I didn't even see you there. Then you know you're in trouble if somebody does that. So, but back in the day, you had to have a purse, like a shoulder purse, and you would cut a hole in the side of the purse, and then turn the camera on already, because to record. Shove the camera in the purse, stick the lens through the hole, and then you would tie a scarf around the strap of the camera, and then put the scarf over the lens of the camera so nobody can see it. And then, when you were shooting, you'd move the scarf real fast. Shooting, not shooting, shooting, not shooting. And so you could see, how scary it was by how many pictures you had of your hand with the scarf, over the lens. So I go into this cult church. And I had heard that people were brainwashed in this church, and I didn't know exactly how it worked to be brainwashed, so I didn't want to be brainwashed. So part of my consciousness was to not be brainwashed. And so at some point though, and I'm shooting, and I was actually, and this is pride going, I was actually thinking, this is such a good story. I wonder what I'm going to wear to the Emmys. You can't think that. You can't let yourself do that. So as I'm patting myself on the back, a guy comes up to me and says, "What's that in your purse?" Oh my God. Right? And I was totally caught. So I thought, what do you do? What do you do? So I said, "You are making me very uncomfortable. And if you don't leave me alone, I'm going to report you." And I thought to myself, report him to who? Because I don't even know who's in charge of this. And he just completely backed off, and I just raced out of that place. But I still had the video.
Did that make it on air?
Of course it did.
Yeah.
No, of course it did. I mean, it's all good. It's really all good. So, although, we can't go into that right now, but you do, like the characters in my books, people do things that they don't think they would ever do. You find yourself in a place making a little decision and then another decision and another incremental decision, and you rationalize that everything is fine, that you're doing it for a good reason, that you deserve this, or you've been ripped off, or you've been harmed, and you're just getting what you deserve. And then suddenly or gradually you find yourself doing something that you wouldn't do. Do you find that in the people that you track down, that they didn't mean to kill someone, but they were just having a bad day, as they say? Or how does it work? I mean, I don't mean to belittle it because it's a big deal.
No, most of the time they're just assholes. Bottom line.
You don't work too much.
There's no such thing as just sort of having a bad day.
No, but I mean, somebody makes a little decision and another decision and another decision.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously nobody's born evil. Even if you have that, they talk about the evil gene. They talk about the triad of serial killers, which is, who knows the triad of serial killers?
You guys
what is it?
Cruelty to animals,
yes,
bedwetting, and head injury.
Arson.
Arson.
Head injury. That's George's.
Yeah.
Never
mind.
Sorry. The head injury thing is. Yes. Whether that happens, you've heard the head injury thing, which is, listen, being so tall and so uncoordinated, I've hit my head so many times.
But how hard?
Yeah, but I don't know, I also played a lot of hockey, badly too, so I hit my head a lot when I fell. So, we've seen a lot of that. I actually did a story about Johnny Lewis, who was he played a guy on Sons of Anarchy, and he freaked out and kind of went on this path for some reason just was out of control, and then he killed his landlady and killed her cat and then killed himself. And his father, the only reason why his father talked to me was because he was trying to get the story out that he had a head injury, and he really did have had a head injury right before, and that did seem like it could have contributed, because he was very much he wanted to be in the dark all the time after that. So it made sense that we gone by that path, but I talked to a couple head injury experts, and it was like, listen, this one guy said to me, he said, 5 years ago, I was ringing the bell saying, listen, head injuries, it's going to lead to violence, and now I'm trying to pull the reins back on that because literally everybody that is killing somebody is saying that, no, it was a head injury, and that's why, and trying to use it for defense. So that's the reason why the head injury thing. It's up there, but it's not quite in the triad. Yeah.
So Billy, could I ask you a question? Can you hear, is this microphone?
Yes.
Okay, great. I know that Hank is on assignment when she is off, being undercover now. You've mentioned you're doing investigations and so forth, but is that part of a job that how is it you're doing it?
I'm just doing it.
You're just doing it.
Yeah.
So how are you received by law enforcement? I mean, generally
here's
doesn't go well.
Here's what you do. You call up law enforcement and you say, I never do it with something that's fresh. It's always going to be at least 3 weeks old. And if they've already put out all the information, they haven't gotten it. So I'm always going to call law enforcement because I don't want to spook anybody either. I don't want to spook the guy. If they're close on a guy, I don't want them to say, no, we've got him, we just are trying to build a case, so don't do it, and then I step away. But most of the time they say, what are you doing? And then I have to explain to them, well, I'm going to set up a social media campaign using Facebook and Instagram, and then they say, well, we have a Facebook page. Then I said, let me finish. And it's going to be a Facebook page directly it's just going to be about this crime, not about anything else. And I'm going to place geo-targeted campaigns. And then they're just like, geo what? And then I'm just like, okay, here's bottom line, this is it. I'm basically knocking on the door of every person within a 1 mile radius of this crime, asking them, do you recognize this person? Or do you have any information about it? And then they go, oh, okay, all right, I kind of get it. And then it's a matter of the good cops, the cops that are willing to ask for forgiveness rather than permission will say, yeah, go for it. Some of them will say, well, I got to send it up through my PIO. And then you don't hear back, and then you've got to call them. It's just like, I'm trying to help you here, but.
Okay, so basically you're crowdsourcing what the police, normally those of you who read crime fiction know that, they generally send officers at the scene or constables or whatever it may be around to knock on doors and try to get information at the scene of a crime. So you're taking that one step up.
Yeah.
But now this is a really vulgar question. You don't need to answer it. But how are you paying for all this?
With my money. And my family's money. Sorry, guys. Yeah. Listen, how many steaks can you eat?
Well, I only ask because as a career track, I'm not sure how you would manage that. So
no, it doesn't scale.
But you are a journalist.
I'm a journalist, but I also
and now an author.
And I'm an author. Yeah, but I also I have a day job. I'm a digital exec as a day job. That's how I knew how to do this stuff. So, during the day, I teach media companies how to get clicks and page views, how to get people to use social media in order to bring people back into your site. So like the 25 coolest tattoos we saw at Coachella, that kind of thing. I'm sure anything that you've seen at Phoenix New Times, any of those like slideshows and everything like that, those came from me like 10 years ago. Okay, so sorry for that. And it was decent content, but yes, I did make you click on every page because I wanted a page view for each one. So, but it was that's how I still make that money, but I just take a little bit of that money. Obviously the money goes to mortgage and car payments and kids' tuition, and then just put that towards solving crimes. Now I've got this book, and the book is going to, some of the proceeds from this book is going to go towards being able to solve more crimes, and specifically to, I run into so many places where they say, yeah, we have this murder victim who's a doe and unidentified, but we don't know what to do. And I'm just like, yeah, we'll pay for that. I'll extract the DNA. I'll pay for that through my stuff, or myself and Paul will pay for it with Murder Squad stuff, and say, we'll extract the DNA. We'll get a forensic genealogist to do the familial DNA to try and find a second cousin or a third cousin, whatever, and then track it back down. Identify the victim, so then we can identify who the perpetrator was. And so that's to paraphrase Walt Disney, he said, I don't make movies to make money, I make money to make movies, and it's the same thing with me. I'm not making money I'm making money to solve crimes, not vice versa.
Well, one of the reasons I asked is that if you were monetizing it, you might get different reception from law enforcement or from the people that you speak big too. You might even run into licensing requirements.
Mhm.
Sorry, as a lawyer, and they go, yeah, I'm not gonna about this. These private investigators actually have to have licenses. You can't, if you're gonna take money for it. So
Sure. Well, that's one of the
you know.
reasons. That's one of the reasons why I don't. And in the book, when I tell people if they want to do this, one of the rules is you don't take money from the family. You don't take money even for the ad. You're paying for this yourself. That's it. And you're not taking money from the reward because the reward is for the tipster. So you're doing it for hugs from the victim's family.
Well, presumably, if you're good at crowdsourcing, at some point, if you went into something really costly, you could also, get people to contribute funds.
Good crowdfund, yeah.
Yeah, because that's happening more and more when you see businesses and so forth, doing crowdfunding, and when their taxes go up or other unexpected things happen. So you could do that as well.
Certainly, yeah. No, people have asked for that, and I think if we do run into something that is bigger, there was one case I was talking with Todd Matthews at the Doe Network, and he was talking about there is a group of 3 does. It's not a murder case, but they are unidentified from one of the hurricanes. And they were buried, and they want to exhume them and test the DNA. So that potentially could be something that, I asked him for an estimate. He's getting back to me for an estimate of what that would cost, and then we'll see if I'm just going to go ahead and do it, or if I'm going to try to crowdsource it.
Wow, it's so interesting to hear this thing is sort of growing organically, isn't it, that he's doing? That's really, isn't it fun? Hank, you probably talk to people who, have somehow stumbled into a career path or a whatever path.
It's not a career path.
No. Well, if it leads you to being a published author,
Yeah,
I
no. This is the only.
That's a career path.
Yeah.
But
Well, I do think it's interesting, that having chosen a career as a journalist so many years ago, there's a goal in that, to make the system work, to find the bad guys, for the good guys to win and the bad guys to get what's coming to them. And in the end, you want to change the world a little bit. Just do what you can to make a difference and to get some justice. And that's why I became a television reporter. It's not just solving murder crimes, which is, incredibly important. But I've gotten people's homes out of foreclosure. I've gotten laws changed in Massachusetts that protect you from predatory lending and predatory home improvement contractors. I've gotten millions of dollars in refunds and restitution for consumers. We've gotten laws passed so infants born in Massachusetts are given the vaccinations to prevent them from having metabolic diseases that could kill them. They weren't getting those before. Those kinds of joys come from, we found in Massachusetts, thousands of times a year, when call 911, emergency responders, police and firefighters would respond to the wrong address. Thousands of times a year. And when I asked for the documents from the state about that, they told me they weren't public documents. How many times was there a 911 mistake? And they told me that that's not a public document. And I'm like, yes, it is. And we fought all the way to the top to get those documents. They're called discrepancy reports. And every single time there's a mistake in Massachusetts 911, they write a report about it, and then they put that piece of paper in some bin, and nobody ever looks at it again, and nobody was ever correcting them. And so when I finally made a public records request to get those documents, and they held out for a year and wouldn't give them to me, when I finally forced them to bring them to me, they brought me this big corrugated cardboard box. And imagine if somebody taking 6,000 pieces of paper, swooping them into the box, and they put them on my desk like, here you go, sister, is this what you wanted? And I'm like, yes, it is. And I took that box home, and for an investigator, this is like a treasure hunt. I took that box home, and I dumped that box of 6,000 pieces of paper on my dining room floor, and I spent the weekend sorting them by cities and towns, 351 piles, 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts. And at the end of that Sunday, I knew exactly where the 911 mistakes were happening and how many, and I was the only person on the planet who knew that. I sorted so many pieces of paper that my hands were bloody from paper cuts from doing it, and there was blood on the documents as I was working on them. So now my producer and I, when we talk about a good story, we say, "Is there blood on the documents?" That makes it a good story. But that is, you were talking about a story with no ending, and I think that's completely fascinating because I have no outline for my books. They're murder mysteries. They're big, fat, page-turning murder mysteries, airplane books, beach book. CNN named The Murder List the ultimate beach read for this summer, so that shows you what kind of page-turner it is. But I don't know the endings. I have no outline. I don't know the endings of each of the book as I'm writing them. And I think it's because of being a journalist. I think it's because of being a journalist. I go into the story looking for the story. I know I'm going to find the story. I have confidence that I'm going to find the story. And it's the same thing in my crime fiction. I go into it with that gorgeous gem of a beginning of an idea, like The Murder List, and then find the story that is. You know, some people can't do that. Some people don't have the emotional, mental capability like you do of taking a challenge, of doing something that nobody else could do, and then being as successful as you are in doing it.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say it's successful. I mean, my success rate sucks. It's about 15%.
You need a T-shirt that
I
says
lose a hell of a lot more than I win, but it's 15% of crimes that would have never been solved anyway.
Yes.
So I think that's
yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why don't we move to questions?
Let's move to questions. Yes.
This is for both of you. How do you decide which case that you're going to work on first? And also, what is the oldest case that you've worked on besides the body in the barrel underneath the house?
Besides the body of the barrel
How do you
underneath the house,
decide?
yeah. The oldest case I've worked on, the body in the barrel, that would have been I've dabbled in doing stuff with Zodiac and things like that. So, I'm actually looking at some really sort of older things. Me and Paul are kind of dabbling with the idea of going on tour, and one of the ideas would be to maybe take a really super old case in one city and just see what he would have done with the case versus how, And then as far as picking them goes, I'm usually going to go with the ones that I think have the best video or the best sketch or something that is going to resonate with the most amount of people when I put it
It's
out
a really
there.
great question, because you must get bombarded with requests from people, and you have to choose which story, which challenge is a doable thing. What could you actually accomplish? And you can, after all these years of doing it, I can kind of tell it, that you can kind of tell also what is a possibility, almost a blink reflex sort of thing. Although I'm not always right about it. I got a call recently from a guy who said, there was a big explosion in a paint factory in Danvers, Massachusetts several years ago. It was tragic and horrible, and nobody could figure out what happened. And people died. So I got a phone call from a person very self-confident who said, Hank, I know why that paint factory exploded. So I said, okay, how do you know? And he said, I am part of a group that inspects factories like that, and we've discovered that it had a secret lab in the basement, and that's what exploded. So I thought, really? A secret lab in the basement? I don't know, but it's possible. Stranger things have happened. So I said, okay, and you don't want him to call Channel 5 and give them the story, and then I blow it. So I said, okay, so this organization that inspects and finds secret labs in factories, what is the name of your organization, sir? And he says, the Ashtar Intergalactic Command. So I figured, well, that probably wasn't the best story, so I didn't follow up on that one. You just do the one that's a doable story. Like lawyers in my book say, it's a winnable case. That's a good case. I'm sure you've heard that. A good story is one where there's a problem that needs to be solved, but there are characters who you care about, that there's evidence, there's video, like you say, there's documentation. We say, can you send me that paperwork? Can you send me those pictures? Can you send me that video? Can you point me in the right direction? Tell me who to talk to, and then I can do it. There's something that comes from experience with it, don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
Good question.
Anybody else?
The oldest case. Oh my gosh, the Kathy Boardman murder was, I think, I mean, the oldest for me is a lot older than the oldest for Billy, you know, okay, we'll just stop that. But the Kathy Boardman murder was really an interesting case for me. This is the case of a young woman who was found dead in an old shed in a suburb of Massachusetts years ago, and there were two young men who were implicated in the case. And one of them, of course, you know, the first to talk is the first to walk. One of them ratted out the other one. The second one went to prison for life. And the first one, and I thought, that isn't right. I don't see how this can be in long story, which wound up with the person who had gotten the shorter sentence and had been let out while his friend was in prison for life, confessed to me that he had actually done it after the research that we did. And that was, gosh, that was a long time ago. And that was sort of the beginning of, for me at least, figuring out that the courts didn't always get it right, that lawyers didn't always get it right. Again, this is the key to the murder list, so that shows how the fabric of our lives sort of evolves. But you know, there's a case that how many people say this to you, Billy? I have a perfect case for you. All the time. Well, I do have a perfect case for you. We can talk about it. But that's such a good question.
Yes.
How do you handle sort of the, I guess, processing of emotions or emotional boundaries with your work? Because you said, you know, you have a day job, this is a hobby, and then, like, I know for a lot of us, we can turn the podcast off, we can put the book down.
You're not allowed to turn the podcast off.
Ever.
What are you doing? No. You started all over.
How do you handle that? Is it something where you personally, go like not viral or like binge research, but is it what is your process like in terms of keeping it healthy?
Yeah.
And keeping a distance from the people you're working with, boundaries?
It's very hard to keep a distance, and the boundaries is interesting just because I connect with so many people on Facebook.
Yeah.
And so many victims' families on Facebook. So my green light, when my green light's on, they see it and they start asking me questions, even if it's 3 o'clock in the morning. And I'm not going to not answer them because they're the most important part. This entire thing that we have here, this true crime thing, is nothing. It would not exist without the victims. And that's why I always like to stress so much that we need to put the victim at the forefront. So if a victim's family is going to ask me a question at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to answer it. A lot of times they just even want to just talk. And it's something that I'm not necessarily trained at because it gets kind of deep sometimes, but I'm still gonna be there for them.
It's interesting because as a reporter too, you are completely focused on the people who are involved in this crime, and they are the most important thing in your entire life while you're doing the story. But then the key is, and the difficulty is, when the story is over, when the story is finished for me as a journalist, it's not finished for them as a family. It's not finished for them as the people who are still affected by this crime. And there's an interesting line that you have to walk about that. I'm not your friend. You know, I'm the person that's going to help you if I can. But then you go on with your life, and I go on with my life. I mean, I covered the Casey Anthony trial and Klaus von Bülow and the Ralph Richard murder, but also the case that became the movie A Civil Action and the mob trials in Boston. And so you just elevate who you are to being the objective detective, storyteller, truth teller to you, and then sometimes I just go home and cry. And then I think, okay, done with that, just as you say, because the world can be scary and the world can be dangerous, but that's what we're all here to help prevent.
Anybody else?
So with the murder squad now that you guys do every week, I imagine you're getting a lot more attention. People know who you are. Are you making progress with those weekly cases?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's one of the frustrating things is that we can't talk about it yet because justice is so slow. In the same way with the Marcus Gaines case, that took 6 months before I could even tell anybody about it. So for that one, I can say the first episode we did with Bradford with the pictures of the victims from the serial killer, we think we have a really 99% that we ID'd one of the women. So it's just a matter of we've got to, and a lot of really great tips came in, and something I didn't even think of, and it's one of those things you just hit yourself over the head with. Somebody wrote and said, and she actually showed up at one of the events, she said that, can you look at the back of the photos? And I said, oh no, you know what? You're right. Because sometimes they used to stamp them in Photomat, or even like they had different stuff on the back there. I was like, no, I mean, I was patting myself on the back because when the LA Sheriff's Department, when they put out the photos initially, they only did the headshots. I went, took a picture of them, and actually showed the whole picture. So you were able to see, like, there's that one woman that's probably a girl, actually, she's probably under 18, where she had the Allman Brothers poster in the background and all that. And you ID them that way, but I didn't even think of flipping them over. So now I got to go back to the LA Sheriff's Office and say, I got to see that box again. I'm going to flip them over.
You know, that's so interesting too, because first of all, that's a great idea, great element for crime fiction. So thank you for that. You know, why didn't I think of that? Because that is so fascinating. You're so adept at new technology and, you know, geo-targeting and all those kinds of things that you do so brilliantly. But the old-fashioned stuff is still important too. That somebody writes Aunt Billy on the back of a photograph,
or even
tucked
or
into
even
book.
just a date. You know, just to narrow it down, like Photomat would put dates on them or whatever. So I just know, you know, as soon as I get back to LA, that's what I'm going to be doing.
And as soon as I get back to Boston, I'm putting that in the book.
Yes.
You tossed out a number of 200,000. What is that referring to?
220,000 unsolved murders in America since 1980. And there is more than a third of a chance that if you get murdered, they will not solve it. That's the clearance rate right now. The clearance rate's about 62%. The clearance rate in 1960 was 90%. Why did that go down so much? A bunch of different factors. A lot more guns, a lot more drugs, a lot more of a population that moves around a lot, so we don't really know our neighbors. Untrust in the police, which is at a very big high, and when cops shoot, you know, an unarmed civilian, that resonates not only in that town. I talk about it in the book where, you know, there was a shooting like that, and 911 calls went down. It happens now across the country that people are just going to say, you know what, if this happens, I'm not going to call the police. There's also this whole idea that the snitching culture, which we have to turn away from. They used to be called informants. Now, you know, everybody thinks they're writing for The Wire and they write snitch. And but there's one caveat for that, is that they were also railroading a lot of people back in 1960, and but it doesn't really add up to those numbers like it is now.
Billy, are those sorted out into stranger crimes and domestic crimes, or is it just one lump?
I mean, I'm sure we could sort them out. I mean, the biggest frustration of investigations in America is that there's not one big giant database. It's living. All of this information is living in 19,000 different databases, and you know, it's you know, I talk about this with unidentified remains. So there's 40,000 to 60,000 unidentified remains sitting in storage lockers or in paupers' graves in America. There's 80,000 to 100,000 missing persons. You'd think, oh, we should have one database and they could all talk to each other, and there isn't. So I once did a story with a woman whose adult son had gone missing. Every year on his birthday, she's putting up posters and everything. Turns out he was found 6 months after he went missing, about a half mile away, and his body was sitting in the storage locker about a mile away. And the police, you know. So if you can't get a jurisdiction within a mile radius to talk to each other, how are we going to get somebody who might have picked up a sex worker in Virginia and is a trucker killer, and then, you know, takes her to Ohio and then kills her and then buries her someplace?
So is that a function of the size of this country, or is it a function of all the jurisdictions, federal and state?
It's all the jurisdictions. It's all. I once complained about this to a deputy director of the FBI, and he said, you know what, when we set up this country, we were worried about tyranny. We weren't worried about databases. And that's the reason why, is that everybody has their own sort of little fiefdoms. And, you know, it's one of those things that you just shake your head and say, we could put a man on the moon, but we can't have a database like that. You know, just to be able to knock in, there's a murder squad investigation that's coming up where similar MO, somebody had, 2 victims were found, both sexually assaulted, both outside, both within a similar area, and both with their pants down but not off. And it's like, okay, you should be able to put all of that stuff into a search engine and have spit out to you every time that has happened. And there's no way to do that.
Don't you think that there's also a problem with lack of resources
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's why I wrote the book. Because the police need to get the people in this room and say, you know what? We can actually utilize those people in this room, the people that are reading the book. Also, we have the most educated, most skilled retiree force ever in the history of the world in the baby boomers. And they would want to do this. It's just a matter of just getting 1 or 2 police departments, if anybody has any police department connections, and say, let's set up a civilian liaison. There's a lot of stuff that we can do. There's a lot of databases that could be built. There's a lot of old police transcripts and police reports that can be transcribed and searchable. There's a lot of stuff that can be done if they're willing to just say, yeah, we're willing to use civilians.
And it's interesting too, exactly on that point, is that there was just a story in Massachusetts where a guy on a motorcycle, a guy in a truck killed 7 people on motorcycles. And the guy in the truck, the driver who had killed the people, should not have been on the road. He should have had a suspended license for 1 million infractions previously, but they were in other states. And those infractions had come to Massachusetts and come to the registry and just been put in a bin, and nobody entered them into the state's database. And as a result of that, they found that there were tens of thousands of infractions, out-of-state infractions, that had come in to the Massachusetts registry that had just not ever been entered. And as a result, all those people whose licenses should have been suspended and they shouldn't have been driving were still driving. So those 7 people were the victims that we know of that lack of resources, which is terrifying. So we think the system is going to work. We think 911 works. We think the registry works. But when you start digging into it, that's when you realize that it's this veneer of protection that we have that doesn't always work.
Anyone else?
How did you get into your other podcast?
My other podcast, The First Degree? Okay.
Enthusiasm.
The First Degree I got into because Alexis Linkletter was working on a Golden State Killer doc for, she's a producer, so she had contacted me, because of I'll Be Gone in the Dark. She was best friends with Jack, and they came to me and they said, we want to do a podcast. I said, well, what's going to be the hook on it? And then they came back and said, well, we both know people who were either murdered or had been murderers, and what if we told those stories through those people's eyes? So the idea behind The First Degree is to tell, it's the only thing I do with adjudicated cases, and it's to tell the story of a murder through somebody who is 1 degree away from either the murderer or the victim. And we just had, this past Wednesday, we had probably the most well-known First Degree in Kit Goldman on.
Follow up, which one do you like better?
Which podcast do I like better? Last podcast on the left.
It's like choosing your children. Was there a question over here?
Hi, Billy. I'm
Hi.
Fran. I'm a huge fan. So, first of all, I really admire your work. So, thank you very much. One of my favorite true crime moments, I was there when you and Paul kind of revealed the identity of the feral victims in Crime Con in New Orleans.
Okay.
So, that was so exciting. As a amateur citizen detective over here, what would be your recommendation if I want to get involved, if I want to help? Where do I start?
Yeah, I think the first place to start is searching for a case, and you can use that with the media. Unfortunately, when we talk about resources of the police departments being down, the media has been decimated because of just economics, but they still are covering murders, not the same way they were before. Finding one of those cases that has flown under the radar, looking around for, doing searches for things like, identified video or and still unsolved or something like that, and finding one of those cases and saying, you know what, that looks like a case that probably could be solved, but they probably had a press conference on it a year ago, nobody watched it, and then they just, okay, nobody called us, and we just caught another murder, so we have to go and do that one. And that's what happens with the detectives are incredibly overtaxed. So, to be able to go that and say, all right, take it from there, this looks like a good one, read everything you can about it, and then you can go and reach out to the police department and say, hey, you know what, this crazy guy wrote this book and I want to try what he's doing.
Thank you.
So this whole podcasting thing is really fascinating to me. Most of you listen to the podcast?
Yes.
Okay. So I have a question. One, how did you find it? How did you find Billy's podcast?
My favorite murder.
Oh my God, you guys said that like I called that. My favorite murder.
That's really creepy.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'm thinking is so interesting is that anyone with some equipment, a microphone and all, can do a podcast at this point. You know, back in the day, Hank, you and I mean, you know, a TV station or a radio station, you know, was a more formal enterprise, right?
Yeah.
Took funding, you took, you know, it was accountable, and all kinds of stuff. But today, just like crowdsourcing, you know, any one of you could be a podcaster. I do a podcast with authors for the Bookstore that are now on iTunes and Google and, you know, on our website and so forth. And I always try to talk to the authors about things we didn't discuss in the program, so to make it more interesting. But I think that's so fascinating, you know.
Yeah, and it's
anyone can do this.
It's democratized, and it's really important for crime stories too, because having worked in television, you know, you have this. TV has such gatekeepers, and they're always looking for what they call the ideal victim, which is a white woman. Bottom line, so you can have. You can tell stories and be able to say to the network executives, you know, we're skipping over you and we're just going to go directly to the consumer and tell these stories. We don't need visuals. We don't need all of this stuff that you think that we need to have that people are going to need in order to pay attention to the show on your crime network. And as we keep going and more, we're starting to cover cases that TV would never touch. And I know that because I've been in the rooms where I've pitched cases and they've said no because the cases are not relatable, and relatable is code.
I'm just going to push
for that.
back. I love you deeply and admire you, and I'm a huge fan. I'm just going to push back a tad on that television only covers the deaths of
I'm not talking about news.
women.
I'm not talking about news.
Okay.
I'm talking about
You're talking
ID, Oxygen,
Drama.
A&E,
Okay.
Lifetime, not just drama, but
No.
TV documentaries like on ID,
okay.
like on Oxygen, where like the Justice, all of that stuff.
So you're
That's
talking
what you're
about
gonna see.
dramatization.
No, not just dramatization. They're still documentaries. But have you watched the Oxygen Channel or ID or any of those guys?
Sure.
Investigation Discovery, yeah.
Yes, and I
Those guys.
understand the theory of what you're saying, but you know, when you talk about television, I think sometimes people think you're talking about news.
About news.
About news, and that's not. I mean,
Sure.
that isn't what happens in journalism. We don't choose what we cover by who the victims are. So
Well, sometimes we do.
sometimes.
Yeah, there's actually a piece of my book in there where
Just agree to disagree.
all right, yeah.
We could easily do it. We're going to stay civilized on that.
Did you think this would happen up here? I mean,
No, it's great. Yes, ma'am.
So Hank, I finished your book a couple of days ago.
Yay.
Were you surprised by the ending?
I'm sorry. Was I surprised by the ending? Yes. I don't know who the bad guy and good guys are in the books, and that's one of the points of the books, and that's what gets me to the computer every day writing, is that I think, ooh, I can't wait to see what happens next. You know, Sue Grafton used to call that the magic, that there's an idea in fiction that comes when the characters just take off and you're not in charge of them at all. I mean, I don't mean to be woo-woo about this. It's writing fiction, and it's, you know, it's a job and a task, and I embrace it thoroughly and love it. But I did not know who one of the murderers was in the murder list. And when I figured it out, I was by myself in my study, and I just stood up and applauded. I'm like, yes, I can't believe this. And I said to myself, just sit down, you're by yourself, no one is seeing you. But yeah, it's, people say to me, what? I couldn't believe the ending of that book. And I'm like, yeah, wasn't that amazing? You know, talk about a surprise ending. I always surprise myself. And that is what I hope always happens. You know, it's fiction, so it's sort of a different demeanor about murder. You know, when there's an ending, that's a shocker, but when you look back, inevitable. And it was all there, all the clues are there. And that's what people have been saying about it, is I should have seen it, but I didn't. Do you remember Witness for the Prosecution, the Agatha Christie play? Maybe you've seen that. when that first was in the movies in 1959, the theater put up a slide at the end of the movie saying, for the benefit of the other moviegoers, please do not reveal the ending of this movie. And that's sort of how I wish there was a slide in the murder list.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. That is the perfect reaction.
Anyone else? Wait.
Way back. Rebecca's a how? Yeah, it was on Oxygen. Okay, so the question is, I recently was on a special with Paul and Lonnie Coombs, a former prosecutor, about the death of Rebecca Zahau. And if you guys don't know this case, she was a woman that was found bound and gagged and naked, hanging from the balcony of a mansion of her millionaire boyfriend. And no, the police did not certainly ask us to do that. The police closed that case and said that was a suicide, and we said that's bullshit, and then we went in there. So the police did not want us there, and they won't reopen that case. We gave them enough to say that you should reopen it, because basically, we were able to prove, because we did a lot of different experiments, we were able to prove that physically it was possible, but victimology-wise it wasn't. There was just so many things that this bottom line did not add up with that. And it's become a political issue now. And the only way that case will be reopened is if the sheriff is out, and that's it. Yes. That guy did. That was for the civil trial. He was there, and he had that room with all of the evidence. And some of the evidence, I agreed with. Some of the evidence I thought was a little hinky. But he was obviously, and he won the civil trial. The civil trial said that the brother who was in the guest house was responsible for the death. Obviously, it's easier to do that in a civil trial than it is in a criminal trial. But yeah, that guy did or I'm not sure how it was chicken the egg as far as if the producer reached out to him or if they reached out to the producer. But yeah. Well, no, with my cases, it's usually it's two things. It's police will come to me, or it's family members. For the most part, it's family members who have just thrown up their hands and said, I got nowhere else to go, so I just heard about you, and could you help me?
When you said it was political, is the sheriff is not interested in having his investigation challenged?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because they've already laid it out. I mean, they actually put an FAQ on there, which I've never seen before, an FAQ on the sheriff's website after 6 months after it happened, because everyone, they wanted to close it very quick. He was a member of the community. It was a big old boys network, rich people's network kind of thing. She had no money. She had nobody to kind of fight for her, and it was just really sad. But also, what you've got, what has come out of that also is that there's a lot of weird, crazy theories that have come out in this. But bottom line is, it needs to be reopened and it needs to be
Well, it has
retried.
a Phoenix connection. If I
Yeah, it does.
remember
Yeah, they're from Phoenix. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
right
And that's the interesting thing too about good guys. When you have a sheriff who is supposed to be the good guy, I mean, we hope so. And then when they do something that's so obviously twisted and wrong, and it's hard to push back against the power of the prosecution. Again, an element of the murder list, right? That the prosecution is supposed to be good. We think it's good, and sometimes it isn't, and we have to be open to the possibility that the police are going to do something that just to get it closed, just to get it closed, that a prosecutor will arrest someone just to get it closed, and the jury, a jury wants to go home. Who knows what goes on in the jury room? So we just have to be so much more thoughtful and responsible for every element of this, and that's why this kind of watchdog element is so important.
Yeah, and I think that's, two of the biggest cases that came out of, Serial kicked open the door for podcasts, and that certainly was putting an eye on the prosecution, and also Making a Murderer did as well. And those were probably the two biggest things that have thrust this reimagination of true crime into the forefront of our culture, and there were two that were taking a critical look at the prosecution.
You know, I think, all right, we can take one more question. We have reached the moment when I know most of you can't sit in these chairs anymore. We've done this so often that we have it down to when everybody's butt starts to wiggle. We know it's time. So, yes, ma'am, you will.
Who is Paul and how do you work together?
Who is Paul and how do we work together? So Paul Holes is a retired criminalist, and he's the guy. You know the Golden State Killer case?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the guy that caught the Golden State Killer. So we worked together on, when I was finishing Michelle McNamara's book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark. We worked together. We got a friendship going. He retired actually like the week before the Golden State Killer was caught, or was actually arrested. We had already identified him and said, this is the guy. And, you know, we just had a really good rapport, and we said, let's start a podcast together, and that's what happened.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your
Barbara,
attention.
can I just say one thing? One thing. I know you guys are awesome. I want to take a picture of you so Lily and I can have it.
Billy wants to take one too,
and to see
right?
if there are any
Murderers.
yeah, over here too. Yes, and yeah. You know, they used to do that. At Ann Rule's reading, they used to do that in Seattle. And believe
she
me,
was here in that happened too. Yeah,
And-
she always had a photograph to see. It's like, you know, they at arson generally they're photographing because there's so often the person setting the fire wants
they
to
want to see the lights.
see the fire, right? So are you all done there? All right.